Good afternoon. We are now convening our panel on child protective and child advocacy agencies. We're pleased to have representation from some of the major organizations here. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Judge Corriero, Michael Corriero, with whom we have collaborated for quite some years. It was actually in 2004 that we started trying to bring about legislation for a New York State independent office of the child advocate. It started in this hall, and our Assemblywoman Barbara Clark and many others have put it forward. And so there is a history, but I hope that whatever we're trying to do today will be crowned with success. It's my pleasure now again, as I said, to introduce to you Judge Corriero, and he will moderate.
Thank you, Dr. Lenzer. Dr. Lenzer and I, actually, we have been collaborators, and we definitely feel the urgency and the need for appropriate policies with respect to children who are victims of violence and the consequences of that victimization as it plays out in the context of so many of our institutions that have the responsibility of resolving issues concerning children. We have a very large panel this afternoon, so I want to give everyone an opportunity to present their positions clearly and carefully, and yet I'd like to leave enough time for interaction with the audience in terms of questions and answers. Before I go forward, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Commissioner of Administration for Children's Services, Ron Richter, who is spending this afternoon with us, and we know how busy he is and how difficult his position is, and yet this is obviously a matter of great importance to him, and we appreciate his presence here. Yes?
May I just also acknowledge the presence of Dr. Enriquez, the Program Officer for Urban Education of the Carnegie Corporation of New York. It's the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and its president, Dr. Martin Gregorian, who kindly provided us with the support to make this consultation possible. So, also like to welcome Dr. Enriquez and
we have a consensus amongst the panelists that we could each present for about 10 minutes. Would that be all right? Of course, my name is Michael Corriero. I was a judge for 28 years, and I had the responsibility of resolving cases 13, 14, 15-year-old children who were prosecuted as adults. And I guess that's my admission ticket to be here this afternoon in the presence of such distinguished and qualified individuals who understand the nature of adolescence and the impact of violence on children. Our first speaker, and I'll go down the list of the panelists, will be District Attorney Charles Hynes of Kings County, who has really been in the forefront of so many progressive programs dealing with children, and so we're really very honored to have him with us.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much, Judge. And it's very, very good to be with all of you. And what we'd like to show is some of the initiatives that we started in Kings County, and which we're very, very proud of. And we have just a wonderful staff of folks who are so passionately committed to doing something about child abuse. We created the first Crimes Against Children Bureau in 1997. I wanted a group of very, very well-trained and sensitive lawyers. You know, not everybody who is a lawyer can handle these kinds of grief-ridden cases with these sad victims, the little kids. So we put together this Crimes Against Children Bureau with that expectation. Okay. It's the only bureau in New York State dedicated to child victims. I can tell you it's also the only bureau in the country which has the same dedicated direction. We prosecute child abuse cases vigorously, obviously, and that means there is almost no plea bargaining at all, and we tend to go to trial with these cases rather than plea bargaining. And we try and protect the victims from further trauma by connecting them with our social workers. I'm very, very proud of the fact that my office has 25 social workers who act as the bridge between victims of domestic violence and child abuse and sex abuse. Good. The guidelines, very, very direct. Children under the age of 13 who've been physically and sexually abused, and of course all child fatalities. We have 30 members, including assistant district attorneys, paralegals, specialized social workers, and administrative staff. And this is an example of what our office looks like. You know, we try and make it very, very child friendly. That's our playroom. And it's our interview room. And typically our assistants or social workers will say to a little child, "You pick the chair to sit in." They almost never sit in a little. Since 1997, we've had very aggressive prosecutions, 8,000 of them, with an 81% conviction rate. When you think of the kind of cases these are, how difficult they are, it's an amazing record, I believe. So. And this is the Child Advocacy Center, which we are so very proud of. In 1996, we collaborated with the police department, Safe Horizons, the Administration for Children's Services, to establish this, the first Child Advocacy Center in the Northeast, and it has many, many benefits. It's the first center in the country to centralize all the disciplines under one roof. And it's dedicated to a wonderful, wonderful leader named Jane Barker, who's just remarkable. Center provides the victims and families with one central child-friendly location. We have doctors who take care of the children's medical needs, and they specialize, of course, in child abuse. The goal is to lessen the trauma by minimizing the number of interviews. So we have a number of disciplines, obviously, who are interested in speaking to these children. And before we had this center, there would be repetitious interviews. It was re-traumatizing the child, and this is just such a better way to do this. Good. The child is interviewed one at a time while representatives of the other disciplines observe from another room. Good. And all members of the team discuss each case, share the information. Wherever possible, we videotape the child for a grand jury presentation. We do that at the center, so it avoids the need to have the child come back to our office. And this is a typical interview observation room. By the way, for our office and for this Child Advocacy Center, please take the time someday to come and see it. We're very, very proud of it. And our waiting room at the Child Advocacy Center, again, a very, very friendly environment for the child. Good. And this is the squad room with where the cops are. Good. Since 1996, we've seen approximately 15,000 children, and it's again, I say it's a labor-intensive investigation, and very, very sad at times. The Cyber Predators Unit was created in 2005 because of my concern that, well, you know, certainly the internet is the most exciting educational tool that we've had. It also has great danger. So we assigned detectives who were especially trained to engage people in the chat rooms, and very often they engage sexual predators in online conversations. The conversations always involve graphic sexual content, which are initiated by the predators. They send pornographic material, and then the day comes and they want to have a meeting with the person who they think is an underage child, and of course when they come, that's when they're arrested. Now, it's like shooting fish in a barrel with the people on the internet. We've indicted 43 people since 2005. Good. But we think the most important part of our cyber predator initiative is the educational part, to send people from our bureau out to the schools to alert the parents and community groups, the administrators and the children to the dangers of internet safety. The STAR program is to deal with the fact that we have a serious problem with teenage prostitution, and the last thing I want to do is to prosecute those kids, and particularly when we know that sex trafficking is such a serious problem for our county and indeed the rest of the country. And we started STAR, which is Saving Teens at Risk, to provide these children with an opportunity through counseling to leave their life of prostitution before it develops into something that leads to adult prostitution. And after the cases, after they finish our program, we then dismiss the charge against the guy. And the benefits are, health care, substance abuse, life skills. We encourage them to re-enter school, to get a GED, train them for jobs, and we help them work with ACS. And each participant is debriefed by a trained member of the staff as to whether they've been a victim of sex trafficking, which is an issue that we're very, very concerned about. Okay. And, we'll move on. 176 kids have gone into the program since 2004. Approximately 13.6% have been rearrested, which is great recidivism rate. Okay. Two areas of concern: religious, people involved in religious life who were charged with sexually abusing children. And a real breakthrough came in 2002 when I negotiated a memorandum of understanding with the Bishop of Brooklyn that required him to turn over any allegations to my office without prior review for a reasonable period of time. And after we're satisfied that we've completed our investigation, we then turn it back. And where possible, we prosecute. Most of these cases are outside the statute of limitations, but we have had 5 prosecutions. And we've had 123 reports from the Brooklyn Diocese involving 79 priests. Project Cul-de-Sac is to handle another religious problem among the ultra-Orthodox community, which typically underreport these crimes of sexual abuse. So working with recognized Orthodox social service agencies like the Met Council and No Hill Children's Home and the Jewish Board of Services, were able to get and encourage people to report abuse. You can go on with that. It's a community outreach to dispel any misconceptions people have about the criminal justice system. We set up a confidential hotline, which is staffed 24 hours a day. And since 2009, we've prosecuted 89 victims through the Cul-de-Sac or Voice of Justice program. Sex trafficking unit, and I think I'm going to end on that because there's so much here. This is a program that really got off the ground because of 2 wonderful people named Judy Lotus and Joanna Patton. They have an advertising agency, and I announced an indictment of a sex trafficker or a pimp. And as a result, these 2 women came to see me and offered to design an advertising program. This is one example of it. These were posters that were found in more than 2,000 stores in Brooklyn, in Russian, in Spanish, in Chinese, in many, many languages. We also had PSAs by Sarah Jessica Parker and Gabourey Sibley, and they were heard throughout New York City. And as a result of that, we got significant prosecutions done. Yeah. All right. So we had 16 cases so far. Many of these cases involve kids under the age of 17. No one has been admitted to bail so far. Okay. And I think I'm going to end there. I think we've covered enough of the program, and we can take questions later on. Okay. Now, by the way, unfortunately, a good friend of mine died, and I'll be leaving relatively early, but my brain is in the house. That's Ronnie Joust, who's the executive assistant in charge of my sex program. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be representing the Children's Rights Incorporated. Ira Lustbader, am I right? Ira is the Associate Director of Children's Rights Incorporated.
Thank you. Thank you to Professor Lenzer and all those who put together this great panel and discussion. Sorry. My daughter claims she has rights, keeps making these bracelets, so I gotta keep wearing them. As some of you may know, Children's Rights is a domestic nonprofit NGO specializing in the legal advocacy for abused and neglected children nationally. I'm the Associate Director of Children's Rights, and I've been with the organization for 13 years. Again, we specialize in investigating, launching, and enforcing large federal class actions around the country against failing child welfare systems, which typically result in comprehensive reform campaigns. At any given time, children's rights work is involved in 10 states nationally. I want to talk briefly today about what I'm calling the hidden victimization of foster children in state-run child welfare systems. As Judge Martin said earlier, and I've had the privilege of seeing her speak twice around the country in the last year, and she's amazing every time. The state is far from a good parent, but I think as any lawyers involved in rights enforcement will tell you and believe from our hearts, when the government steps in to that role of parent, it must be held accountable. I'm just going to read you just a few stories from some of our reform campaigns around the country, which for some of you are all too familiar. In Massachusetts, a 6-year-old boy removed from his parents and placed into foster care. In one of his first foster homes, he was repeatedly sexually abused. The agency's solution was to place this 6-year-old boy on multiple psychotropic medications, 6 years old, and house him in a lockdown psychiatric facility for over 4 months. This was immediately followed by 6 weeks in a temporary emergency facility because no foster homes were available, after which he was abruptly moved again and placed in another temporary facility for 6 weeks. For the first 18 months of his life in foster care, with the trauma of being removed from his parents and then the multiple traumas suffered in foster care, this child had received virtually no direct mental health therapy to deal with these issues. Atlanta. When we first filed our reform lawsuit in Georgia, the state's use of emergency shelters to warehouse foster children was shocking by any standard. Overcrowded physical space with rows of beds for kids aged 6 to 16, deplorable unsanitary physical conditions, routine violence and sexual assault, gang activity and initiation rights and child prostitution, daily cycles of arrests of children from the shelter, taken to jail, and then back to shelter the next day. A gross lack of supervision, and a single-room school for all kids aged 6 to 16 without age-appropriate curriculum, and one so-called teacher for all of them. Oklahoma, an infant girl in state foster care for 11 months since birth, moved through 17 different foster homes and facilities, suffered a fractured skull due to abuse in a foster home, and severe dehydration and seizures due to neglect in a group facility. An infant boy 5 months old with an extended stay in an emergency shelter with rows of cribs. He suffered a fractured skull when he was literally dropped on the floor by an overworked shelter worker carrying 2 babies at once. A 7-year-old boy moved 8 times in 18 months, physically abused continuously in a foster home for a year without any intervention at all, separated from his siblings, and denied any visits. An expert review in Oklahoma looked at the Child Welfare Agency files for just those 3 kids that I just told you about and found that they were shuffled through a total of 70 caseworkers and 75 supervisors while they were in state custody. So what is the population affected by this kind of victimization? In the US, approximately 3.3 million reports of abuse and neglect are filed every year, covering over 6 million kids. Approximately 22% of those reports, or 700,000, are substantiated, meaning that abuse was found to have occurred. At any given day, over 400,000 kids are in foster care across the country. They're disproportionately poor and of color, and approximately $26 billion is spent annually on these systems, $12 billion of that money in federal money. Yet frequently, We find time and again these systems are so overburdened, mismanaged, and dangerous that they violate the basic constitutional and human rights of children. What's even worse, perhaps, is that this victimization remains largely hidden from public view. For one thing, state confidentiality laws keep much of the records and information concerning the foster care population largely hidden from public view. Also, it seems simple, but foster kids don't vote. There's no powerful lobby raising the priority within the executive branch, especially at the state level. And as you likely know, when there's the occasional horrific foster child death, there's a few days of coverage and deserved outrage, but it quickly fades. For those that survive victimization, the public hears almost nothing about what these kids endure, and there's little to no accountability for failure. Despite significant federal funding, there's very little teeth in federal oversight. At best, there's a threat of withholding federal funds, but even that is rare. Congressional action creating enforceable protections in all the states has been very weak. Here's a striking example of a lack of accountability. There's a metric that states report out to the federal government, and I'm oversimplifying, but it's concerning what is called the rate of, quote, abuse in care. That's the rate of confirmed abuse of foster kids in state custody. Just reading one paragraph from this recent article in an Oklahoma newspaper. Last December, the Oklahoma Department of Human Services issued a news release that proclaimed Oklahoma was one of 24 states that met a national standard of children in state custody not experiencing confirmed abuse or neglect while in state custody. The claims were false. The agency deliberately did not report to the federal government instances where children were abused and neglected in state shelters and group homes. Had the agency included that data, the state would have had to report that its performance was nearly 5 times the accepted national standard. And the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for the Department of Health and Human Services confirmed that Oklahoma is just one of 14 states that, despite the obligation, they exclude data concerning children abused and neglected in state facilities and institutions. This kind of hidden safety crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. So what are the major systemic problems that cause this hidden victimization? Put aside for the moment the important issue of improper government intrusion into the lives of poor people. It's real, we must respect it, we must deal with it. And the criminalization of poverty and the intersection of race and class issues involved in decisions at the front end. I have enormous respect in all the work I've done in so many states for Judge Martin and so many others across the country and the weight of the decisions they have to make every day. Her point that kids should remain with their families whenever possible, when it's safe to do so, it's absolutely true, and it's absolutely the first goal of child welfare. But the appropriate renewed emphasis on families has also coincided, unlike folks like Judge Martin who have been ahead of the curve, it's coincided with devastating economic times in the last few years. So as advocates, we must be vigilant to ensure that shrinking foster care is not just a budget reduction tool. Putting those very real issues aside, I'm talking here today about what happens to the over 400,000 children who were already removed from their parents and live in state-run foster care systems on any given day. That's the population I'm talking about that the public needs to know is suffering hidden victimization every day. A drastic shortage of foster homes and other living situations for foster children. Kids removed from their homes, placed in state custody wherever there's a bed or a slot, and not according to their needs. Children warehoused in emergency shelters, children separated from parents and siblings. Inadequate services like the denial of medical, dental, and mental health services for children, basic education and special education services, and a lack of family support services to enable kids to go home to their parents. And there's poor monitoring of homes and facilities. Homes and facilities are often privatized with state systems without real oversight, lax licensing, and no efforts to ensure corrective actions. Suspected abuse in systems never investigated or improperly investigated. Nationally, government accountability is especially poor in this area. Time and again, we see systems where abuse or neglect in foster home or a facility is simply ignored. And if the injury is really bad and it gets noticed, the child simply gets moved to another facility or another home. No corrective action, no protection of other kids in the home, and new kids get housed there a few days later. And the hidden victimization goes way beyond the physical and sexual abuse that is so real. Multiple moves, kids bounced around 6 or more times a year in foster care from home to home. Kids warehoused in shelters and institutions. Kids separated from community and parents. Kids separated from siblings and denied opportunity for visits. Denied medical and mental health care. The overuse and misuse of psychotropic medication on foster kids for behavioral control. Kids languishing in care for years or their whole lives until, as several have already discussed, they're turned out at 18, hardly able to live independently. Who can deny that all of these issues amount to victimization? And amazingly, through all of this, in many systems throughout the country, foster kids have no right to counsel. The organization I work for, Children's Rights, has a model of reform campaigns that seeks to protect kids from this victimization and seeks to bring accountability, and I'm really proud of that work. It's not all gloom and doom. The hidden victimization of kids in many states in this country is an outrage in foster care, but they can and must operate humanely as systems and comply with children's constitutional and human rights. Some systems are showing dramatic change. Foster care systems in New Jersey and Milwaukee have greatly reduced the occurrence of abuse and neglect inside the foster care system. Tennessee has dramatically reduced its rate of institutionalizing foster kids, and new leadership in Connecticut has put that state on a similar path. Counties in Metro Atlanta have completely transformed their system of providing lawyers for every single kid at all stages of their experience. While impact litigation is surely making a real difference in foster care in terms of accountability and results, it's very clear from today and from this gathering that a lot more strategies are needed. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Jane Golden, who is the Vice President of the Children's Aid Society.
Good afternoon. I don't know about you, but I feel like we need to breathe after that. That was very, very heavy. So my name's Jane Golden. I'm the Vice President for Child Welfare Policy and Foster Care Services at the Children's Aid Society, but I'm actually here today representing Richard Bury, who's the President and CEO of Children's Aid. And he's out of town, so he asked me to try to channel him, which is going to be hard because he's a much more passionate speaker than I am, but I will do the best that I can. The topic is poverty and its role in the cycle of child abuse. The deaths of Marcella Pierce and Kymel Oram, two young children whose lives ended tragically while under the watch of the city's child welfare system, understandably raised concern about the effectiveness of that system. While outrage is warranted each time a child known to the system dies, it's troubling that news coverage of these incidents largely ignored the systemic challenges involved in protecting children from abuse, not the least of which is the profound public underinvestment in child protection and family support services. A recent New York City Independent Budget Office analysis of 10 city agencies for the period fiscal year 09 to 11 found that the Administration for Children's Services received the deepest cuts. ACS budgets were cut by 26.4%. The fire department budgets were cut by 5.9%, police department by 6.7%. I think we all understand that reducing fire and police department budgets impacts public safety. All things being equal, fewer police resources make it more difficult to fight crime, and fewer resources for the fire department leave us more susceptible to damage from fires. We shouldn't be surprised then that reducing the ACS budget restricts our ability to protect and serve New York City's most vulnerable children. Who are these vulnerable children? Recent data from the United States Department of Health and Human Services tells us that for low socioeconomic household, rates of reported abuse are 5 times higher than for other children. Rates of reported neglect are 7 times higher than for all other children. African American children experience maltreatment at higher rates than white children. This shouldn't be surprising considering the staggering disparities in the income distribution by race. Of the African American children experiencing maltreatment, 61% were classified as low economic status. Only 21% of the white children experiencing maltreatment were classified as low economic status. The current economy has created an environment of increasing deprivation, which is the underlying cause of neglect. Parents living below the poverty line and those dependent on government assistance are struggling to provide adequate food, shelter, education, and health services for their kids. These realities are further exacerbated by family stress, social isolation, unemployment, and housing instability. And while most families living in poverty don't engage in abusive behavior, the circumstances of poverty often conspire to neglectfully influence child health and development, create environments that can lead to abuse and neglect. When families struggle for generations just to get their basic needs met, they can begin to develop a culture of poverty. Children who experience generational poverty often believe that their fate is beyond their control. On the other hand, children raised in wealthier families are taught their future is whatever they dream it to be. This culture of poverty often devalues education and traditional employment, and it often, very often, leads to poor outcomes, including physical and mental illness, substance abuse, family violence, and crime. Over time, government has instituted essential programs and services to protect children from abuse and maltreatment, but it's done little to address the significant and underlying challenges faced by poor families. Children growing up today are far more likely than they were 30 years ago to remain in the socioeconomic class into which they were born. And yet words like poverty or poor were not mentioned by either Governor Cuomo or Mayor Bloomberg in their 2011 State of the City addresses. Programs which serve residents of America's poorest neighborhoods benefit disadvantaged children. But government's investment in these programs is plummeting. Local, state, and federal cuts to programs and services, including education, early childhood programs, and after-school programs, and proposed cuts to programs such as food stamps, housing, and health care, both Medicaid and Medicare, are only going to perpetuate an already dire environment for families and children living in poverty. This, in turn, increases the burden on nonprofit organizations, which must reconcile a growing demand for services with decreasing funding opportunities, salary freezes, and layoffs. Right now, 1 in 3 New York City children, that's 500,000 kids, are living below the poverty line. And a record 1.8 million of our neighbors, nearly 1 in 5 New York City households, are relying on food stamps to feed their families. We're failing to exercise the minimum degree of care necessary to support our children, and instead are perpetuating conditions that create grievous harm. This is especially true during early childhood, when poverty is most harmful and sets conditions for later life. Early childhood poverty is associated with poor health and lower productivity in adulthood. Children who grow up in lower socioeconomic status families don't live as long as children who grow up in more affluent families. If we continue to let our politics dictate our policy choices, we risk becoming a country with permanent classes, one where a child's future is not determined by hard work or creativity, but by where they were born and to whom they were born. As an organization working to help children in poverty succeed and thrive, the Children's Aid Society believes that we not only have an obligation to level the playing field for the most vulnerable children, but we also have a responsibility to uphold America's promise. It's a simple promise, really, that in this country, where you end up in life will not be determined by where you started, that your birth should not define your destiny. We know that education gives children in poverty the best and most reliable chance to become self-sufficient and responsible adults. Yet children of poor families are up to 6 times more likely to drop out of school than wealthy children. Perhaps even more alarming, research indicates that only 6% of children who have been in the child welfare system graduate from college. At Children's Aid, our commitment is to help each of our young people graduate from college. We also know that children are not going to achieve academic success without the support they need to focus on their studies. If a child is hungry or wonders whether she'll be able to sleep in a bed at night or needs glasses because she can't see the blackboard, it's difficult to focus on schoolwork. At Children's Aid, we address the root causes of abuse and neglect by providing holistic support for children at each developmental stage, while also supporting their parents and families. These supports include medical and mental health, dental services, substance abuse prevention and counseling, early childhood programs, parent workshops, direct material assistance, and referral services. We also advocate for policies that will strengthen overburdened and neglected systems that are too often working in isolation rather than in coordination. In other words, the child welfare system needs to work with the education system and with the healthcare system, the substance abuse prevention system, and the housing system. Fixing just one of these systems won't make a noticeable difference for disadvantaged children. Children like Marcella and Kamel are born into lives of severe hardship. Families living in poverty, struggling with hunger, housing instability, mental illness, physical disability, crime-ridden neighborhoods, inadequate schools, and more. Marcella and Kamel didn't just need love and support. Their parents didn't just need steady jobs and stable housing. They needed coordinated and integrated systems that ensured no child fell through the cracks. They needed an investment in the kinds of supports that make vulnerable families strong, supports which, if provided early and consistently, can help families avoid the worst tragedies. They needed this country to act urgently on its promise that all children deserve the same opportunities for success and that anything less is abuse. Thank you.